I've documented thousands of neurological anomalies in my career, filing away cases of complex syndromes and baffling conditions into neat, logical categories. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for Eliza. The nurses on the pediatric ward started calling her the Oracle. Her strange, rhyming riddles didn't sound like illness. They seemed to be premonitions of death itself. That night, the pediatric ward felt particularly oppressive. A storm raged outside, lashing rain against the tall, sterile windows, mirroring the chaos that felt perpetually on the edge of breaking point. The air was thick with the antiseptic smell that clung to every corner, overlaid tonight with the faint, acrid tang of ozone. Every distant cough or muffled cry felt amplified in the oppressive quiet between rain squalls, creating an atmosphere of foreboding that seeped into the exhausted silence. I was well past the end of a double shift, the fluorescent lights of the ward humming with an almost unbearable intensity. Staff moved through their tasks with a subdued urgency, their faces drawn with fatigue and the unspoken weight of the evening's events. I am Dr. Jacob West. For 15 years, I've navigated the complex pathways of the human brain, guided by the principles of evidence and logic. My approach is methodical, perhaps overly so, a trait ingrained from years of medical training, and perhaps a natural inclination inherited from my British background. I trust scans, data, and observable symptoms. I analyze, diagnose, and treat, seeking rational explanations for every deviation from the norm. Superstition, intuition, anything that couldn't be quantified or explained held no place in my practice. My mind was a cacophony of thoughts, each demanding attention, yet offering no solace. The call from the ER punctuated the night, slicing through the haze of exhaustion with its urgency. A child, alone and speaking in riddles, was an anomaly that defied immediate categorization. It was the kind of case that both intrigued and unnerved me, challenging the very foundations of my logical approach to medicine. A 6-year-old girl found wandering alone near the highway. No identification, no signs of physical trauma beyond minor scrapes, but exhibiting highly unusual speech patterns. They wanted a neurological consult. Another anomaly, I thought, another file to open. I made my way down to the small examination room. The first thing that struck me was her stillness. She sat on the edge of the bed, legs dangling, her small frame seeming even tinier against the stark white sheets. Her blonde hair was damp, clinging to a face that was pale but not tear-streaked. Her eyes, though, they were an unusually piercing blue, unnervingly steady, and they seemed to look through everything. There was no childish apprehension in them, no fear, just a quiet presence that felt impossibly old. She wasn't crying, wasn't calling for parents, showed none of the expected distress from a child found wandering alone by a highway. The air in the room felt thick, held captive, as if anticipating something. Outside, the storm raged, a violent counterpoint to the unsettling calm within, mirroring the rising turmoil in my own mind. Eliza remained an enigma, a quiet paradox. I introduced myself, spoke softly, asked her name. She didn't respond, only watched me with those unwavering blue eyes. I tried simple questions, how she felt, where she came from. Silence. The ER nurse, a young woman named Sarah who looked as worn as I felt, offered a sympathetic shrug. "She hasn't said anything, doctor." Not a word since they brought her in. I pulled up a stool, tried a different approach, speaking gently about toys, colors, anything a 6-year-old might latch onto. Still, nothing. She just sat there, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. I was about to note selective mutism, perhaps a trauma response, when her lips parted. Her voice was soft, melodic, a startling sound in the tense silence. She didn't answer my questions. Instead, she spoke a rhyme. It carried an unexpected weight, a calm authority that defied her years. The words hung in the air, resonating with a strange clarity before fading, leaving a profound quiet in their wake. Silver rivers flow beneath the skin. When darkness comes, the end begins. It was delivered flatly, like a nursery rhyme. I paused, a strange jolt running through me, quickly suppressed. Cryptic language like this could indicate developmental issues or be a manifestation of severe psychological trauma. I made a mental note, order a full psychiatric evaluation alongside the neurological workup already planned. It was unusual, certainly, but it had to be explainable. Echolalia, perhaps, or a fragmented response to profound shock. My rational mind clicked into gear, filing it away as another symptom to analyze. The rhyme lingered, a haunting melody refusing to fade from my mind. It was an utterance easily dismissed as a child's distress, yet it held a strange allure, a whisper of truth just beyond my grasp. I was making notes on my tablet, trying to categorize the anomaly, when the silence shattered. The door burst open. A nurse stood there, face pale, breath ragged. "Code blue, 3rd floor, 312!" Arterial bleed. The hospital erupted. Controlled chaos spilled into the hall. Doctors and nurses, fueled by adrenaline, streamed past, their footsteps echoing urgently. Crash carts rattled. Frantic voices called out orders. A familiar tightening gripped my chest, a professional reflex, but I remained rooted for a moment, my eyes fixed on the small girl who had just spoken those words. Silver rivers flow beneath the skin. Blood, arterial bleed. When darkness comes, the end begins. Darkness had already come. Later, much later, after the frantic pace of the code subsided, the grim news settled. The patient in 312 hadn't made it. Sitting in the quiet doctor's lounge, the rhyme returned, pressing in. An arterial bleed, silver rivers. Died after dark. When darkness comes, the end begins. It was a chilling coincidence, nothing more. The human mind craves patterns, connects disparate threads. A 6-year-old's nonsense, a random emergency, logic insisted. My rational brain fought back against the rising tide of unease. There had to be an explanation. There always was. Despite the unsettling coincidence of the first riddle, my medical training demanded a thorough, rational approach. The following morning, Eliza underwent a complete neurological workup. We ran every test imaginable, MRI, EEG, countless blood panels searching for metabolic disorders, genetic markers, anything that could explain her unusual speech and the frustrating lack of any history for her. The results came back astonishingly normal. Her brain structure was typical, her electrical activity within expected parameters for her age. Physically, she was healthy, if a little underweight. Medically, she was a perfectly unremarkable 6-year-old girl, save for one profound anomaly, her communication. She wouldn't speak in simple sentences, wouldn't answer direct questions about herself or where she came from. She interacted with the nurses and staff politely, accepting food and drink, showing no signs of fear or distress. This in itself was deeply strange given her circumstances, but when prompted to speak, she would lapse into silence or, occasionally, deliver another cryptic rhyme. It was as if the capacity for normal conversation simply wasn't available to her, or perhaps she chose not to use it. She would spend hours drawing quiet pictures with crayons, often simple stick figures or, more unsettlingly, oddly detailed depictions of hospital corridors she couldn't possibly have seen. Naturally, we brought in a child psychologist. Dr. Elena Petrova was highly respected, with years of experience in trauma and developmental disorders. She spent hours with Eliza, trying play therapy, gentle questioning every technique in her arsenal. Her initial assessment pointed towards severe selective mutism, possibly triggered by profound trauma or abuse. This seemed the most logical explanation. The riddles could be a form of echolalia, repeating fragmented phrases heard elsewhere, twisted by a traumatized mind. The story of her being found wandering alone certainly supported the trauma hypothesis. Dr. Petrova recommended further sessions, focusing on building trust and uncovering potential suppressed memories. As days passed, Eliza's presence became an unspoken focal point in the ward. Her silence was more eloquent than words, speaking volumes about the mysteries she embodied. The nurses, despite their initial trepidation, began to care for her with a protective tenderness, as if shielding her from the world that had so abruptly cast her adrift. She would sometimes look at them with those piercing blue eyes, moments stretching into an eternity, as if she was seeing something beyond their understanding. Her drawings, while seemingly innocent, began to take on a new significance, capturing the hidden corners of the hospital with unsettling detail. The next riddle arrived unexpectedly during her scheduled brain scan. Eliza lay still inside the loud, humming machine, her small body a picture of calm acceptance as the magnetic fields pulsed around her. The technician, a veteran of countless scans, called me over afterwards, looking visibly shaken. He said just before he started the main sequence, Eliza had opened her eyes and whispered something that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The technician repeated it haltingly, the the words feeling alien in the sterile, humming silence of the MRI room. Heart of stone will crack and break. When clock strikes 12, the soul will wake. He didn't understand it, of course, and neither did I. Not really. I pushed it away, another piece of Eliza's cryptic nonsense, hoping the scan results would offer a rational explanation, anything physical. Heart of stone, clock strikes 12. The language felt archaic, biblical. But the scan, like everything else, was normal. There was nothing tangible to anchor my understanding. But word of Eliza's unsettling pronouncements began to spread beyond the pediatric ward. Administration saw a liability, a child with no records, speaking riddles, drawing attention. Colleagues outside my department grew skeptical, dismissing it all with knowing smiles and patronizing remarks like, "Dr. West, you're letting a 6-year-old get into your head." My insistence on observation without a clear diagnosis was met with increasing resistance, administrative pushback mounting against keeping her here indefinitely. But then, the clock did strike 12, midnight. The silence was shattered by the urgent call for a code blue on the cardiology floor. It was an elderly patient, admitted days ago with severe aortic stenosis, calcified heart valves that had, in effect, turned his heart to stone. At the precise stroke of midnight, he suffered a massive cardiac arrest. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, he didn't survive. Heart of stone will crack and break. The imagery was chillingly, impossibly precise. Afterward, a different kind of silence fell over the hospital, one thick with unspoken tension. Corridors that had bustled minutes before now felt charged, alive with the hum of fearful whispers and furtive glances. A silent consensus formed amongst the staff. This was no mere coincidence. The air was heavy with a dread that mirrored the storm still raging outside, wind and rain lashing against the windows, a chaotic symphony accompanying the unnerving stillness within the walls. For me, the word coincidence had lost all meaning. 2 predictions, 2 deaths, each horrifyingly specific. The storm outside howled, but the real tempest was inside my head. I spent the rest of that sleepless night in my office. The rhythmic clicking of my keyboard, a frantic counterpoint to the silence. I scoured every database, every journal, medical, psychiatric, even historical. I looked for anything, any documented case of a child with predictive speech, any explanation for these rhyming pronouncements tied to death. I found scattered mentions of purported precognition, whispers dismissed as folklore or hallucination, but nothing like Eliza, nothing so chillingly precise. The foundations of the rational world I had built my life on as a doctor began to tremble. They felt like they were about to shatter. My grounding in observable fact, in logical deduction, it was crumbling, confronted by something utterly inexplicable, something that felt ancient, deeply unsettling. How could a 6-year-old know? How could a random words align perfectly with unforeseen medical tragedy? The unease was a physical knot tight in my stomach, but the mystery deepened. Eliza's origins, a void. Social services searched, found nothing. No missing persons reports in the state or nearby. No birth records, no school enrollment, no digital footprint. It was as if she had simply materialized, a small, quiet enigma in the heart of the hospital. Her only language, riddles that foretold death. The cracks in my rational worldview weren't just widening, they were splitting open. This wasn't something medical knowledge could explain. The brief, fitful sleep I managed after the midnight code did little to clear my head. The 2 riddles, the 2 deaths, the impossible accuracy, it circled in my thoughts like a tightening noose. Morning rounds brought a fresh wave of reality, but it was a reality I wasn't prepared for. Instead of clinical discussions of patient charts, I was intercepted by hospital administration. Their faces were grim, their voices hushed but laced with an unyielding firmness. They spoke of disturbing coincidences, of the unnecessary stress gripping the staff, and the untenable situation of housing a child with no identity, no diagnosis beyond usual speech patterns. The pressure to move Eliza out was escalating, a palpable force pushing against my every instinct. I pushed back, arguing for more time, for the critical need for further investigation, but I could feel the administrative tide turning irrevocably against me. The next few hours were a blur of discreet interviews. I sought out the staff who had been on duty during both incidents, listening to their accounts. The nurse who found the first patient coding described the chilling moment the words, "Silver Rivers," flashed into her mind, instantly linking Eliza's riddle to the arterial bleed she discovered. The technician who heard the second riddle during the MRI still had a tremor in his hands, recounting how Heart of Stone had echoed with unnerving clarity when the midnight code was called for the patient with severe calcification. Their stories weren't embellished, they were simply bewildered, unnerved by events that defied any rational explanation. They looked to me for answers I couldn't possibly give. Simultaneously, the search for Eliza's background continued to yield nothing. Social services widened their net, checking databases across surrounding states, contacting every shelter and foster care agency they could find. Nothing, no missing child reports, no family connections, no previous medical history, no school enrollment. It was as if she had genuinely appeared from thin air, a ghost in the system, utterly untraceable. This void where her past should have been only deepened the mystery and fueled the concerns of the administration. How could a 6-year-old child exist without leaving a single footprint? Desperate for a medical explanation, any explanation that could anchor us back to the familiar ground of science, I consulted with Dr. Evelyn Reed, one of the hospital's leading neurologists. I presented Eliza's case, carefully omitting the more fantastical elements of the riddles at first, focusing instead on her unusual speech patterns and the complete absence of neurological findings on standard tests. Dr. Reed listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She suggested rare, complex temporal lobe anomalies, perhaps too subtle for our initial imaging, or even a highly unusual presentation of a seizure disorder affecting language processing. She recommended advanced functional MRI and PET scans techniques that could map brain activity in real time as Eliza attempted to communicate. It was a slim hope, but it was a scientific one, a potential path back to the ordered world of diagnosis and treatment I understood. While waiting for the advanced scans to be scheduled, Eliza's behavior began to shift subtly. She still spoke only in riddles or remained silent, but her focus turned inward, manifesting in her drawings. She started depicting specific hospital rooms and corridors, rendered with an unsettling accuracy in their layout and details, places she had never been taken. And she began to hum old melodies, tunes from decades past that a child her age today would have no way of knowing. These small changes, combined with her continued composure in the face of her strange reality, began to paint a picture not of a child suffering from trauma, but of something else. Then came the third riddle. It wasn't directed at me this time, but whispered softly to a young nurse reading to Eliza. The nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, found me later that day, her face starkly pale. She said Eliza had suddenly fallen silent, her unnervingly clear blue eyes fixed on something unseen beyond the room, before whispering the words, "On wings will fail to fly, beneath the burdened souls will lie." It made no sense to Sarah, but the delivery, the vacant, distant look in Eliza's eyes had genuinely frightened her. Iron wings. Sarah had murmured, bewildered, airplanes, birds. I felt a fresh wave of cold dread wash over me. Another riddle, another impending event. I forced myself to push it down, to focus on the scheduled brain scans, on Dr. Reed's scientific theories. I clung to the hope of a neurological explanation. The answer to the riddle arrived violently just hours later. Without warning, a catastrophic failure struck the main elevator bank in the central tower. The heavy steel cables, the iron wings, snapped under stress, sending one car plummeting several floors before the emergency brakes screeched and locked it into place. Two other cars were trapped between floors, holding visitors and staff captive inside, the souls beneath the burden. The hospital instantly plunged into a state of controlled chaos. Alarms blared, security personnel rushed through the corridors with urgent speed, and a terrifying period of uncertainty gripped the building as emergency crews worked to free those trapped. Miraculously, and against all odds, there were no fatalities, only injuries and profound shock among those involved. 3 riddles. 3 events directly connected to their cryptic pronouncements: an arterial bleed, silver rivers; a midnight cardiac arrest, heart of stone, clock strikes 12. Now, an elevator malfunction, iron wings. The rational explanations I had so desperately clung to were crumbling around me like dust. The administration's concerns, previously a quiet, background pressure, morphed into outright demands. Hospital security, already on high alert from the elevator incident, wanted Eliza removed immediately, advocating for a more secure, perhaps psychiatric, facility. They no longer saw her merely as an unusual patient, but as a potential catalyst for chaos, or worse, a bad omen whose presence invited disaster. My ethical dilemma was stark and immediate: protect this child who seemed to perceive the future, regardless of how unsettling that perception was, or yield to the immense institutional pressure and potentially abandon her to a system that might never understand or care for her unique condition. In my renewed, almost frantic search for any medical or historical parallels, I stumbled into the hospital's ancient medical library archives. Tucked away in dusty, rarely opened volumes were scattered, often dismissed accounts of children throughout history who were reported to have exhibited similar precognitive abilities, particularly those tied to death or disaster. They were labeled in different eras with terms like oracle children, death whisperers, or simply filed away under unexplained hysteria or anecdotal oddities. These were often subjective, intertwined with superstition and folklore, but the recurring theme was undeniable: young children, frequently appearing abruptly and without clear origin, who would speak in cryptic phrases that seemed to foretell tragedy or loss. The descriptions, however brief or biased by their time, resonated with Eliza's case in an unsettling way. It was the first hint, buried deep in the past, that perhaps this wasn't unique to her, but a phenomenon, however rare, however poorly understood by science. Lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt the foundations of my scientific worldview begin to fracture. Every instinct, every year of my training, clawed for a logical explanation. A complex neurological disorder, I'd tell myself, a form of induced psychosis from trauma. A bizarre series of coincidences my mind was straining to connect. Yet, the evidence was mounting. Cold hard, terrifyingly precise. Eliza's riddles weren't the confused ramblings of a sick child, they were predictions. And they were coming true with chilling regularity. How could I, a doctor sworn to uphold science and reason, reconcile this with what I was witnessing? The boundaries between the possible and the impossible were blurring, dissolving around me, and I felt myself standing irrevocably on the fault line. The pressure from administration was relentless, but I secured a brief reprieve, just enough time to bring in a child language specialist, Dr. Ania Sharma. Her reputation preceded her. She worked with children exhibiting severe selective mutism and trauma-induced speech disorders. I clung to the hope that her expertise, coupled with the objective data from the advanced brain scans we'd ordered, might finally offer a medical explanation for Eliza's bizarre communication. Sharma spent several hours with Eliza over 2 days, employing play therapy, art, and subtle questioning techniques. Initially, there was only the familiar silence, punctuated by an occasional cryptic riddle whispered under her breath. But Sharma noticed something I hadn't. Eliza's riddles consistently described transitions: silver rivers flowing, clocks striking 12, wings failing to fly. They depicted moments of fundamental change, most often the shift from life to death. Sharma began to gently pivot her questions, not probing Eliza's past, but asking about what she saw or felt when she spoke the riddles. She asked about endings, about leaving, about journeys. The change was slow, almost imperceptible, like a distant rumble signaling a change in the air. Eliza would pause, her eyes distant. Then, hesitantly, words would emerge. Not the rhythmic, rhyming structure of the riddles, but simple, direct sentences. The breakthrough arrived when Sharma asked what happened when someone went away. Eliza looked at her, her blue eyes clear and focused, and for the first time since she arrived, she spoke normally. The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that seemed to press down on us all. The very room seemed to hold its breath. Sharma, seasoned and composed, couldn't entirely mask the slight tremor in her hands as she scribbled notes. I felt it too. We were on the cusp of understanding something profound, yet the path forward felt treacherous. Eliza's simple statement seemed to bridge the gap between the mysterious and the explainable, hinting at a truth that eluded conventional wisdom. It was a moment that demanded acknowledgement of possibilities we had long dismissed. "I see the doors people walk through," she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. It was a chilling, pivotal moment. Doors, not illness, not injury, but a transition, a passage. It aligned perfectly with the nature of the riddles. She wasn't describing how someone died, but the final, inevitable moment of their passing. This wasn't a speech impediment, it was a description of her perception of reality, a reality that included seeing the threshold between life and death. This revelation struck me deeply, resonating with something buried in my own past, a memory I had long suppressed, the very reason I had dedicated my life to the concrete, explainable world of medicine. When I was a child, no older than Eliza, I had seen things, felt things I couldn't explain. Shadows that weren't there, whispers in empty rooms, a sense of knowing when something bad was about to happen. It had terrified me. Her words, they didn't just describe a state, they mirrored something in me, a buried resonance. It resonated with something from my own past, a reason I had dedicated my life to the concrete, explainable world of medicine. When I was a child, no older than Eliza, I had seen things, felt things I couldn't explain. Shadows that weren't there, whispers in empty rooms, a sense of knowing when something bad was about to happen. It had terrified me. My parents had dismissed it as an overactive imagination, night terrors. Doctors ran tests, found nothing, suggested therapy. That experience pushed me towards science, towards the tangible, towards proving such inexplicable phenomena were simply the mind playing tricks. I became a doctor to understand the body, the brain, to ground myself in certainty. Eliza was forcing me to confront the possibility that my childhood fears weren't just imagination, but perhaps a less defined version of what she experienced. The hospital corridors, usually a predictable network of routine, were now charged with an indescribable tension. An unseen current seemed to flow beneath the surface. Whispers followed me as I moved from meeting to meeting. While some staff members avoided eye contact, others sought out my opinion, their voices tinged with curiosity and disbelief. The atmosphere felt thick, like a storm gathering energy, and in the quiet eye of it all was Eliza, her small frame carrying the weight of a reality that defied understanding. I was acutely aware of how fragile the balance was between maintaining professional decorum and succumbing to the surreal nature of the situation. There was a palpable sense of urgency to find answers before the situation spiraled beyond our control. While Dr. Sharma worked with Eliza, the hospital board held an emergency meeting. Presented with the mounting coincidences and the complete lack of background information on Eliza, my colleagues were divided. Some were deeply concerned, others openly skeptical, whispering about mass hysteria and media sensationalism if this got out. The administrators were focused squarely on the legal and ethical nightmare. Housing a child with no guardian, no identity, and a seemingly paranormal ability was unprecedented. Social services were now involved, but placement was proving impossible. How do you place a child who might be able to predict death? Every potential foster family backed out once the bare minimum details were shared. She was trapped in the hospital, a medical enigma turned institutional liability. Then came the results of the advanced brain imaging. Dr. Reed presented them with a mixture of professional detachment and profound bewilderment. The scans showed areas of unprecedented activity in the temporal lobes and prefrontal cortex, regions associated with language processing, memory, and prediction. There wasn't a tumor, or a lesion, or the electrical storm of a seizure. It was activity unlike anything she had ever seen, particularly in the areas linked to processing complex information and, speculatively, even intuition or precognition. Her brain isn't damaged, Jacob, Dr. Reed said, shaking her head. It's operating on a different frequency. Armed with this objective data, I delved deeper into the medical archives, searching for anything that matched Eliza's neural patterns or the accounts of oracle children. I found scattered case studies, often relegated to footnotes or appendices, detailing individuals throughout history who seemed to possess unusual sensitivities to impending death or disaster. They were rare, their abilities varied, but the connection was there. It wasn't a recognized diagnosis, but a recurring, unexplained human phenomenon. That afternoon, the fourth riddle arrived, delivered with chilling specificity. Eliza was sitting quietly, drawing, when she suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened, fixing on a point somewhere beyond the room, perhaps towards the operating wing. Then she spoke, not in a whisper, but with a clear, almost declarative tone. The man with golden hands will reach for breath, but find only death. The words landed like a blow. Golden hands. The phrase echoed in my mind, immediately bringing one name to the forefront, Dr. Julian Goldstein. He was the hospital's chief cardiothoracic surgeon, renowned for his precision and skill, often called the man with golden hands, and he was scheduled to perform a complex emergency bypass surgery later that very day. The connection was immediate, terrifying, undeniable. A cold dread settled over me. My mind raced, weighing the impossible implications of confronting a senior surgeon with a child's prophecy. Fear threatened to cloud my judgment, but I knew I had to remain tethered to logic. The stakes were absolute. Lives hung in the balance. There was simply no room for error. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. The man with golden hands will reach for breath, but find only death. Dr. Julian Goldstein. The emergency bypass surgery. The connection hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a vague premonition, it was specific, targeted, urgent. My scientific skepticism, already reeling, couldn't rationalize this. A man's life, perhaps his patient's too, hinged on the riddle of a 6-year-old girl. My immediate instinct was action. I had to warn Dr. Goldstein. I found him prepping for surgery, an island of calm competence amidst the pre-op buzz. I pulled him aside, my voice low but urgent. I laid out the sequence, the previous riddles, the correlating deaths, Eliza's strange brain activity, and now this specific prediction involving him. I watched his face. Professional courtesy melted into disbelief, then irritation. "Jacob, I respect you," he said, hushed but sharp, laced with professional affront. "But are you seriously suggesting I delay a critical bypass based on a child's riddle?" He ran a tight ship, operated with absolute confidence. My bizarre story was a disruption he neither understood nor appreciated. I argued, pleaded, presented the scans. He listened, impassive, then delivered his verdict. "My hands are golden because I don't indulge in superstition. I deal with facts, with anatomy. This sounds like a fascinating case for psychiatry, but it has nothing to do with my surgery today." He patted my shoulder, dismissive. "Get some rest, Jacob. You look exhausted." He turned back to his team, the brief interaction seemingly forgotten. I left the operating room feeling a profound sense of urgency. Not just for this surgery, but for the broader implications of what Eliza's condition might mean. This wasn't about one life, it was about a pattern, a series of events that defied conventional understanding. The weight of responsibility pressed down, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of scientific inquiry and desperate hope. Each step down the corridor felt like an eternity, every moment a reminder of life's fragility. Defeated but not deterred, I gathered the few colleagues who had witnessed enough to believe, or at least to be deeply disturbed. Dr. Sharma, the child psychologist, Dr. Reed from neuroimaging, Dr. Chen, a trusted senior resident present during the first riddle's fulfillment. We met in a small, sterile conference room, the air thick with unspoken tension. How could we prevent something we didn't understand, predicted by a child who saw doors? The sterile conference room air grew thick with unspoken tension as we pored over Eliza's riddles again. Silver rivers, a heart of stone, or iron wings. They consistently described aspects of the victims or the circumstances, but the outcome, death, remained constant. Could we interpret, reach for breath, differently? Could it mean something other than the patient? Could it refer to Dr. Goldstein himself? The thought sent a chill down my spine. If the riddle referred to his death occurring while his golden hands were working, it would be catastrophic. We settled on a plan that felt both audacious and absurd. We would discreetly monitor the surgery. Dr. Chen would observe from the viewing gallery, ready to alert the cardiac response team at the first sign of trouble, specifically watching Dr. Goldstein. Dr. Reed would monitor Eliza's physiological signs. Her fever had spiked again, and she had become lethargic, mirroring her state before the previous predictions. It was as if the act of seeing the future took a physical toll. Dr. Sharma stayed with Eliza, trying to soothe her, while I paced, caught between the sterile certainty of the hospital corridor and the chilling uncertainty of Eliza's world. The next few hours were a blur of hushed conversations, strained nerves, and the agonizing crawl of time. I watched the clock, my stomach twisting with anxiety. The operating room was a hive of controlled activity, visible through the viewing gallery glass. Dr. Goldstein, steady and precise, worked over the open chest cavity. The patient's vital signs were stable. Everything seemed normal, routine, except for the child in room 3B, seeing doors. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the secure line to my ear. Vital signs holding. Incision made. Bypassing vessel. Everything looks textbook, Jacob. I desperately wanted to believe him, to dismiss the last few days as a shared delusion brought on by exhaustion and stress. But Eliza's listlessness, her fever, felt too real. And the riddle reached for breath. Suddenly, Chen's voice sharpened, cutting through the quiet anticipation. Hold on. Goldstein's slowing down. He's rubbing his chest. Looks pale. My blood ran cold. I sprinted towards the operating wing, the sterile corridors a blur. Through the glass I saw it. Dr. Goldstein paused, his hands still, gloved fingers pressing against his chest. A look of confusion, then pain contorted his face. He stumbled back from the operating table, gasping. Reached for breath. It wasn't the patient, it was him. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just Dr. Goldstein's life hanging in the balance, it was the integrity of our medical understanding. The room seemed to close in around me, the sterile environment a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging within. Colleagues moved with precision and urgency, their actions seamless and coordinated, yet there was an underlying current of disbelief. How could something as intangible as a riddle hold such sway over the tangible, visceral reality of life and death? The room erupted into controlled chaos. The anesthesiologist immediately took command of the patient's vitals. Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the comms, sharp orders summoning the cardiac team. I didn't hesitate, bursting through the viewing gallery doors, yelling my own confirmation, my voice tight with urgency. In moments, the room erupted in controlled chaos. A team swarmed Dr. Goldstein, gently lowering him, securing the sterile field, while others kept the patient stable. It was a brutal race now, 2 clocks ticking down, the patient on the table, and the surgeon collapsing beside him. The response was textbook, honed by countless drills, a testament to our training. Defibrillator paddles readied, IVs placed, medications rushed in. They were saving the man with golden hands, snatching him back from the fate the riddle had foreseen. Then, as the medical team fought for Dr. Goldstein, another voice ripped through the controlled urgency, crackling over the comms. It was Dr. Sharma. Jacob! Eliza! She's seizing. I couldn't split myself in two. My focus remained on the operating room, on the immediate, visceral crisis. The cardiac team fought for Dr. Goldstein, pulling him back from the edge of a massive myocardial infarction. A widowmaker suffered right there in the sterile heart of the hospital. The patient, somehow, remained stable under the skilled hands of the remaining surgeons. They had done it. They had intervened. The pattern, the seemingly inevitable trajectory predicted by the riddle, was broken. Later, watching Eliza sleep, recovering from the seizure, my mind finally had space to race. She had predicted this specific event with unsettling accuracy. She had physically deteriorated as the predicted moment approached, and she had seized a profound neurological event at the precise moment the predicted outcome was averted. It wasn't mere coincidence, not simply perception. There was a tangible, physical connection to the future she foresaw. My initial hypothesis solidified into something more concrete. She wasn't causing these events. She was sensing them, a biological seismograph detecting tremors of fate, but with a deep, physical and emotional cost. Her condition wasn't a predictor of death alone, but a predictor of impending, seemingly unavoidable outcomes. And perhaps, just perhaps, those outcomes weren't unavoidable after all, if the warning was heard. Eliza stirred, slowly waking from the seizure. Her eyes fluttered open, the unsettling intensity gone, replaced for a moment by the soft gaze of a tired child. The high fever broke, her breathing steadying. We ran immediate scans. Her brain activity had changed again. The unprecedented bursts in the precognitive areas remained, but the pattern had shifted, calmer, as if the energy had been spent or redirected. Dr. Reed, poring over the new images, looked bewildered. It's like the signal was disrupted, he murmured, then rerouted. But the most striking change wasn't found on any scan, it was in her drawings. Until now, her art had been typical for a 6-year-old, stick figures, bright suns, abstract shapes. Then, she began to draw intricate, accurate floor plans of the hospital. Not just her own floor, but the ICU, the oncology ward, even sections of the ER. And on these drawings, she'd mark certain rooms with a small, dark X. Quietly, chillingly, we cross-referenced these marked rooms with patient outcomes. Every single one corresponded to a patient who suffered a significant, often fatal, decline within hours of Eliza finishing the drawing. The implications were impossible to ignore. A quiet dread settled over the hospital, an undercurrent of fear felt by everyone. Nurses whispered in break rooms, doctors exchanged worried glances in the halls. Each marked room became a silent focal point of vigilance. The air grew thick with anticipation, every day a silent question of what might happen next. The hospital administration convened an emergency ethics committee. The debate was fierce, dividing the medical staff. On one side stood the skeptics, dismissing the drawings as confirmation bias, random chance, or elaborate manipulation. On the other were those who had witnessed the Riddles' fulfillment, who had seen Dr. Goldstein nearly die, who were now seeing the marked rooms. Could we ethically use a child's seemingly predictive ability? What did that mean for patient confidentiality, for the very nature of care? Was this a gift to be harnessed, or a burden to be protected? Tension crackled in the corridors, turning collegiality into quiet suspicion. Through it all, my focus remained on Eliza. The professional distance I usually maintained dissolved completely. She wasn't just a medical anomaly anymore. She was a vulnerable child caught in something far beyond her understanding. My protective instinct, dormant for years, flared with surprising intensity. I found myself spending more time in her room, not just for observation, but simply being there. Reading her stories, watching her draw those unsettling maps. Then a new, unexpected element of the mystery presented itself. An elderly woman arrived at the hospital, frail and soft-spoken, claiming to be Eliza's grandmother. Her name was Margaret. She had no identification, no address, only a story about hearing whispers that led her here. Administration, eager for a simple resolution, began the process of verification. But the more we dug, the less sense it made. No birth records for Eliza, no family history matching Margaret's details, no missing persons reports. The inconsistencies piled up, turning initial relief into deep suspicion. Who was this woman? Her serene demeanor was unsettling, a stark contrast to the chaos her arrival seemed to foreshadow. Every interaction with her felt layered, evasive. Her eyes, clear and piercing like Eliza's, held secrets I couldn't decipher. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, the feeling that she was somehow integral to the unfolding events was undeniable. Eliza's reaction to Margaret was the most telling. The child who faced impending death with unnerving calm, who spoke in cryptic prophecies, showed genuine, wide-eyed fear. She clung to me, burying her face in my side, a simple, normal reaction of a child scared of a stranger. It was the first time I'd seen her act like a typical 6-year-old, a stark contrast to her oracle persona. Security footage, reviewed retrospectively, painted a disturbing picture. Margaret had been in the hospital longer than she claimed. The tapes showed her wandering corridors, entering patient rooms for brief periods. Cross-referenced with Eliza's riddles and later drawings, we saw a chilling pattern. Margaret had visited patients who subsequently declined or died, often just before Eliza delivered a corresponding riddle or marked a room on her maps. Was she connected to Eliza's ability? Was she somehow amplifying it, or something far worse? The calm menace I sensed around Margaret felt palpable, a quiet confidence that spoke of hidden purpose. The night after Margaret's appearance, Eliza's fever returned, though less severe. She tossed in her sleep, restless and murmuring. I sat by her bedside, monitoring her vitals. Through the haze of sleep, she whispered, not in a riddle this time, but something equally chilling. The shadow man collects his due, wearing faces old and new. The phrase hung in the quiet room, a new layer of dread settling over the hospital, hinting at a presence, a collector, moving unseen among us. Eliza's whispered words about the shadow man seemed to twist around Margaret, amplifying the sense of unseen purpose that surrounded her. The elderly woman's arrival, her flimsy story, Eliza's clear fear, it all coalesced into something far more unsettling than a simple case of a lost relative. Our investigation into Margaret intensified. We fed her description and every detail we had into every database accessible. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a chilling thread pulled taut through archived personnel records across different cities. The name Margaret, or variants, appeared in hospitals that years later reported unexplained clusters of deaths or strange outbreaks. Each time she had worked briefly, often in non-medical roles cleaning kitchen staff before vanishing. No official record linked her to wrongdoing, only this persistent, unsettling pattern of presence preceding tragedy. My research, initially confined to rare neurological conditions, now broadened into the fringes of medical history and folklore. I unearthed accounts, often dismissed as myth or superstition, tales of individuals, sometimes children, who seemed to possess an uncanny awareness of impending death. They were given names like death omens, psychopomps, or oracles of the grave. These accounts, scattered through old journals and texts, described traits that, while not an exact match, bore a disturbing resemblance to Eliza's riddles, her calm demeanor around death. Doctor, I began to formulate a theory, tentative and terrifying. Eliza didn't cause these events. She was simply acutely sensitive to death's presence, a biological sensor for its approach. The deeper I delved, the more I confronted the vast unknowns of human perception. These ancient tales, so easily dismissed as folklore, stood before me in a living, breathing child. Eliza's abilities seemed to bridge the chasm between science and the mystical, challenging everything I thought I knew. It was a humbling realization, stripping away biases, exposing the blunt limitations of modern medicine. As our suspicions about Margaret grew, so did the pressure from Child Protective Services. They saw a 6-year-old girl guardianless, exhibiting bizarre behavior, and demanded placement in foster care. I fought them. I argued she was not a ward of the state, but a medical phenomenon under critical observation. Removing her, I insisted, would erase our only chance at understanding something profound. The battle was draining, pitting scientific necessity against bureaucratic walls. Then, she was gone. One moment in the visitor's lounge, the next vanished. Security footage showed her simply walking out a side exit into the stormy night, melting away as silently as she had arrived. A hospital-wide manhunt erupted. A frantic search, not just for a potential guardian, but for someone we now suspected was inextricably linked to the very fabric of death within these walls. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every distant sound amplifying the tension. Silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, pressing down on us, thick with unspoken fear. Margaret's disappearance wasn't just a missing person case. It became a palpable presence, an unseen force lurking in the hospital's corners. An undercurrent of anxiety hummed through the corridors. Nurses and doctors exchanged guarded glances, hushed whispers of the shadow man weaving through the unease. The storm outside wasn't separate from the chaos within. Thunder rumbled like a drumbeat of impending threat. We were caught in a relentless waiting game, jumpy and on edge. Even routine procedures felt fraught with danger now, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, a sudden flicker of lights, each detail taking on a new, ominous significance. It was during the height of the search, hours into Margaret's vanishing act, that Eliza spoke plainly for the first time. She was sitting up in her bed, engrossed in one of her unsettling floor plan drawings, marking room 312 with a stark, dark X. I knelt beside her, my voice pitched low. "Eliza," I asked gently, "can you tell me about the X? Why do you draw it?" She looked at me with those penetrating blue eyes, clear now, unclouded by fever or the veil of riddles. "That's where the door will open," she said, her voice surprisingly clear and completely devoid of fear. "The door." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What door?" She gestured vaguely with her crayon towards the drawing. "The door people walk through when the man comes. The shadow man." She nodded simply. Hay opens the door, and some people, they just go. She didn't describe it with terror or dread. It was a simple observation, like describing the rain outside. She saw death not as a monster or an ending, but as an entity, sometimes perceived as a shadow, sometimes wearing the faces of people she knew, but always accompanied by a door. It wasn't frightening to her. It was merely a process she witnessed, a transition she observed. This explained her unnerving calm in the face of human mortality. She wasn't witnessing the horror of dying as we understood it, but merely observing a crossing of a threshold that was, to her, just another part of the unseen landscape. Sitting there, listening to Eliza calmly describe the shadow man and the door, I felt an inexplicable stillness wash over me. It was as if this child held some ancient, profound knowledge, a wisdom that transcended our limited medical understanding of life and death. Her presence was both grounding and unsettling, a stark reminder of the vast, unexplained mysteries that lay just beyond our grasp. This revelation ignited a firestorm of debate among the medical team. Was this an incredibly complex delusion, a symptom of deep-seated psychological trauma manifesting through a unique synesthesia where she perceived death visually? Or was it something else entirely, something that defied our fundamental understanding of biology and consciousness? My scientific training screamed for a rational explanation, for more scans, more diagnoses, a label to box this anomaly. The evidence, the precise predictions, Eliza's calm description of an unseen entity and its doorways, it all chipped away at my skepticism, leaving me adrift in a sea of the unexplainable. Discussions among my colleagues grew increasingly heated, arguments flaring up over coffee and late-night rounds. Some clung desperately to the safety of established science, demanding rational explanations and concrete evidence. Others, like myself, were beginning to accept the unsettling possibility of exploring beyond the confines of empirical data. It was a difficult tightrope walk, a constant battle between skepticism and a reluctant belief, with Eliza at the heart of it, her innocent presence challenging everything we thought we knew. Despite the immense ethical quandaries and my own internal conflict, a dangerous idea began to take root among a core group of us who had witnessed enough to believe. What if we could harness this? Not exploit her, but use her sensitivity as an early warning system. The thought was fraught with peril, opening up unprecedented ethical questions. Could we possibly develop a way to use Eliza's abilities to identify patients at highest risk, to intervene before death's door opened? The legal and ethical implications alone were staggering. A horrifying tightrope walk between potentially saving lives and violating every medical principle we held sacred. But the lingering image of Margaret, the quiet dread she instilled, and Eliza's chilling calmness in the face of the shadow man pushed us forward. We felt compelled to understand, and if possible, to act. The ethical tightrope we'd been walking snapped. Margaret's disappearance, combined with Eliza's startlingly calm explanation of death as a visible entity, forced our hand. We needed data, undeniable proof, and we needed it now. The most direct route was a controlled experiment. We decided to bring Eliza to the intensive care unit, a place she had already marked on her drawings, where the line between life and death was in constant, brutal motion. The air in the ICU was thick that morning we brought her in. It wasn't just the usual hum of machines and the hushed urgency of the nurses. It was the quiet dread among the staff who knew why she was there, who knew what we were attempting. We gave Eliza no prior information about the patients. She simply walked through the unit, her small hand gripping mine, her unusually penetrating blue eyes scanning the rows of beds, the tangle of tubes and wires, the rhythmic pulse of monitors. We watched her every movement, every flicker of expression. Her usual calm demeanor shifted. Moments of intense focus would settle over her face. She would pause outside certain rooms, her eyes distant, sometimes whispering sounds we couldn't decipher. She didn't seem frightened, only attentive. She would trace intricate patterns on her palm with one finger, or occasionally shiver, a tiny tremor that seemed to emanate from within rather than the room's temperature. We documented everything, the room numbers she reacted to, the specific nature of her reaction, the exact time. Over the next week, we painstakingly correlated her observations with the patient's medical charts and subsequent outcomes. The results were staggering. For the patients whose rooms Eliza lingered near, or about whom she murmured, there was a statistically significant correlation with a sudden, severe decline in condition, a transfer to critical care, or death within 24 to 48 hours. It wasn't absolute, but it was far beyond coincidence. Our preliminary analysis showed an accuracy rate close to 94% in predicting a significant, negative change in a patient's status. It defied every rational explanation I possessed. Word inevitably leaked. We never pinpointed how, but suddenly the hospital wasn't just dealing with an unusual patient, it was dealing with a media firestorm. Child prophet predicts death in hospital, screamed the headlines. Camera crews descended, administrators panicked. and public opinion fractured between morbid fascination and outright condemnation. Accusations flew: exploitation, fraud, causing distress to vulnerable patients. As the doctor in charge, I became the reluctant face of the controversy, fielding frantic calls, attending emergency board meetings, defending Eliza and our desperate research against a tidal wave of fear and skepticism. I argued that this wasn't about predicting death for prediction's sake, but about potentially gaining precious life-saving time. But the narrative of the oracle child had taken hold, eclipsing the medical possibilities entirely. The relentless spotlight on Eliza intensified the pressure from all sides. Hospital staff, initially skeptical, were now sharply divided into factions: those who believed in her terrifying abilities, and those who feared the chilling implications. Despite the chaos swirling around us, tension thick in the corridors, whispers of curses and miracles echoing behind closed doors, a part of me clung to the potential within Eliza's ability. A chance, I thought, to twist tragedy into opportunity, if only we could understand and guide it. Just as the pressure on the hospital reached its breaking point, Margaret reappeared. There was no sneaking. She walked through the main entrance, flanked by a lawyer, and presented documents. Notarized, seemingly legitimate papers claiming legal guardianship established years ago, though the details remained infuriatingly vague. The legal battle was immediate and fierce. She argued Eliza was being held against her will, exploited, demanding her immediate release. It was a devastating blow, threatening to tear Eliza away from the only environment where we had even a glimmer of understanding. Margaret's lawyer produced historical documents that, while not definitively proving guardianship, painted a strange picture of Margaret's own history. Fragmented records, old newspaper clippings hinting at involvement in unusual circumstances around hospitals, sometimes even linked to children with strange sensitivities. The narrative they began to weave was chilling, that Eliza wasn't unique. She was one of a rare few individuals who appeared throughout history, particularly during times of widespread death or major upheaval. They weren't sensitive to illness itself, but to the sheer, overwhelming imminence of death on a large scale. A natural, albeit terrifyingly misunderstood, phenomenon, Margaret implied. Connecting Margaret's history, Eliza's uncanny accuracy rate in the ICU tests, and the persistent, unsettling feeling that had hung over the hospital since Eliza's arrival, a horrifying realization dawned on me. Eliza wasn't just predicting individual deaths. Her presence here, her abilities manifesting now, wasn't a random coincidence. It was a signal, a warning. If these children appeared during times of mass mortality, then Eliza's appearance here, in this hospital, at this specific time, it meant something immense was about to happen. Something terrible. That night, the full moon hung high, heavy in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe across the floor. Eliza, usually so calm even when describing death, was agitated. She tossed and turned in bed, mumbling, her skin hot beneath my hand as I sat beside her. She whispered, her voice tight with a fear I had never heard from her before. Not even when speaking of the Shadow Man. It was a new riddle, the most alarming one yet, directed not at a single patient, but at the night itself, at the looming darkness outside. When moon is high and night is deep, she whispered, her wide eyes unfocused, locked on something unseen. The reaper's harvest he will reap. Eliza's whisper, a chilling riddle in the sterile quiet of her room, echoed the truth Margaret's history had hinted at. When moon is high and night is deep, the reaper's harvest he will reap. This wasn't a premonition for one life, it was a harbinger of mass death. Eliza's presence, her intensity now, confirmed it. Something catastrophic was imminent, likely within the hospital walls. We had to act, fast. Protocol, administration, they didn't matter anymore. My focus narrowed to one desperate goal: find the source of this impending disaster. A small, trusted team, the few who truly believed now, moved with me. We initiated a frantic, discreet search across the entire hospital. Basements for gas leaks, rooftops for structural collapse, kitchens for contamination. Every shadowed corridor, every maintenance closet felt thick with unseen danger. The air itself crackled with nervous energy, a mirror of the storm outside, a mirror of the dread building within. While my team searched, security poring over days of surveillance footage, the breakthrough came just as dusk blood bruised purples and oranges into the sky. There she was, Margaret, the woman claiming guardianship on camera, accessing restricted areas, manipulating key systems, ventilation, power, even fire alarms. Not clear what she was doing, but it was deliberate, systematic, deeply unsettling. My confrontation with her came in a deserted stairwell, ground floor. She wasn't hiding, she was waiting. The moon, a pale disk climbing the bruised sky, cast long, distorted shadows through the grimy windows. Tension snapped like an overstretched wire. I demanded answers. What was she doing? What did she want? Her eyes, ancient and clear, met mine without a trace of fear. I am not here to bring the harvest, she said, her voice raspy but firm. I am here to guide it, or, if I can, to prevent it. Not death's shepherd, she claimed, but a different kind, one who understood the pattern. As the minutes ticked closer to midnight, Eliza's fever spiked. She grew agitated, breathing shallow, mumbling about shadows, about doors opening wide. The hospital air grew heavy, thick with anticipation, mirroring her distress. Based on Margaret's strange actions and the crushing sense of dread, I made the terrifying call: partial emergency protocols. Discreet evacuation for non-critical patients on upper floors under the guise of a technical issue. Whispers rippled through the hospital, growing from murmurs to hushed questions among staff and visitors. It was in the midst of this controlled chaos, with Eliza burning with fever in her room and the moonlight pouring through the windows, that Margaret finally explained. She wasn't trying to cause the disaster she sensed. She was trying to understand it, to find a way to disrupt the pattern. She had been just like Eliza, she revealed, a child seer herself, decades ago, sensing the approach of mass death. She explained her life had been spent trying to decipher this terrifying gift, understanding why these sensitives appeared always before major outbreaks, disasters, or acts of mass violence. They weren't harbingers of death, she insisted, but a natural, painful warning system, like canaries in a coal mine, sensitive to the impending storm. She had been trying to see what kind of harvest the Reaper sought tonight, hoping to find a weakness, a way to avert it. She wasn't trying to cause disaster, she was trying to map it, manipulating systems not to create chaos, but to see where the energy of death seemed to converge tonight. It wasn't a structural collapse or an outbreak she was sensing. Then, just minutes before the predicted time, it became clear: hospital security, alerted by the anomalous activity Margaret had triggered while mapping, apprehended a suspicious individual lurking in the parking structure. He was heavily armed, his target the hospital, a harvest of violence. Her frantic, cryptic actions, her understanding of where this deadly energy was gathering had inadvertently led us directly to the threat's source, allowing security to intervene. The pattern, for the first time, it had been broken. The silence that fell over the hospital after the attack was thick, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. Staff moved like figures in a dream, quiet purpose replacing panicked urgency. Relief was a palpable wave, yet tension lingered in the corners of every room. The media descended like vultures, tearing at the fragile peace, and the hospital administration moved swiftly to manage the fallout, a desperate attempt to protect reputation while securing the safety of those within these walls. I found myself caught in the sudden calm, the whirlwind of the averted disaster giving way to a deeper, internal storm. The responsibility pressed down the knowledge we now held, the capacity to foresee, to perhaps intervene. It was in the quiet corners, the moments stolen between media inquiries and administrative demands, that I wrestled with the ethics. Had we interfered with a natural course? Was it intervention, or simply knowing? The lines blurred, heavy and complex, questions without easy answers weighing on my conscience. My role shifted, becoming Eliza's protector against the glare. I navigated the storm of questions, a delicate balance of truth and necessary discretion, always putting her first. The need to understand, to explain, became paramount. I retreated to the clinical, the methodical approach I knew, documenting every observation, every correlation. The concept of predictive empathy syndrome began to form a framework for this neurological sensitivity, this ability to perceive the subtle vibrations preceding death. It wasn't mystic, it was biological, albeit beyond our current understanding. As I worked, Eliza herself began to speak more clearly, freed perhaps by the lifting of some unseen burden. She spoke of death not with fear, but as a familiar presence, a natural transition. Her clarity was startling, offering a perspective that challenged everything I thought I knew. And then, in a quiet moment, away from the noise, she looked at me. Her eyes, those unreservedly knowing eyes, held a stillness I understood now wasn't calm, but acceptance. She said, her voice steady and clear, "Sometimes the greatest riddle is why we're afraid of knowing what's coming." It was a truth that resonated deep, the final piece of a puzzle I was still assembling. It was a presence she wielded with a grace and maturity far beyond her years, a comfort to patients and staff alike. I watched as Eliza became a beacon of hope, her quiet strength and insightful observations offering a unique solace in a place defined by vulnerability. She was, in her own way, a healer, providing a form of emotional respite that transcended the limits of conventional medicine. Recognizing the need to protect both her extraordinary abilities and her childhood, the hospital devised a long-term care plan. Margaret, now confirmed as Eliza's legal guardian, stepped fully into her role as mentor. Drawing wisdom from her own difficult path as a former death seer, she guided Eliza, helping her understand the complexities of her gift. Together, they delved into archives, uncovering stories of other children throughout history who had shared this unique sensitivity. It was a search for belonging, a roadmap for navigating their singular circumstances, empowering Eliza to embrace her identity not as a burden, but as a part of a hidden legacy. Looking back, I saw how profoundly the experience had altered my own path in medicine. It shattered the rigid boundaries of my scientific skepticism, forcing me to acknowledge the unknown, to trust a form of intuition I had long dismissed. This shift wasn't just personal, it began to ripple through the hospital itself. Colleagues who had once scoffed started to open their minds, seeing that science and this extraordinary sensitivity could somehow coexist. It fostered a culture of exploration, pushing the boundaries of what we thought medicine could be, driven by a newfound appreciation for the mysteries inherent in life and death. I continued to be Eliza's physician, her confidant, carefully monitoring her development. Our relationship, born from crisis and shared discovery, settled into one of quiet respect and understanding. I watched her grow, still balancing the nurturing of her gift with the simple need for her to experience the world as a child. As Eliza learned to control her sensitivity, her speech patterns began to normalize, a quiet testament to her growing mastery over her unique gift. Our bond, forged in shared discovery, deepened into one of profound mutual respect. I marveled at her resilience and wisdom. In turn, she found comfort in my steady presence and unwavering support. It was a relationship that underscored the power of empathy, a reminder that the most profound insights often arise from the questions we dare to ask, rather than just the answers. Together, we navigated that delicate balance between the known and the unknown, forging a path defined as much by exploration as by healing. The scientific framework I developed, a predictive empathy syndrome, positioned Eliza's phenomenon not as purely supernatural, but as a rare form of advanced neurological sensitivity, a testament to the brain's incredible complexity. Building on this, my team and I began developing protocols for identifying and supporting other children with similar abilities, laying the groundwork for a new field of study within medicine. This initiative aimed to harness these extraordinary abilities for the benefit of patient care, addressing the complex ethical considerations with careful deliberation.